how do you get to this place of being able to build trust when it has been broken?
Like at the end of the day, who's going to make me feel safe is me. And so I had to restore that connection with myself. We have to do that work. And then we can start to approach everything around us from a new space. You can't go any deeper with another person than you've been willing to go with yourself. Intimacy can be broken down into 3 words: into me, see.
I'm Coach Des, mindset motivator and lifestyle entrepreneur. My mission is to help you crush your self-limiting beliefs and embrace being unapologetically you. The Born Unbreakable podcast brings you inspirational stories from all over the world that will empower you to unlock your unbreakable spirit. I'd love to partner with you on your next breakthrough. Go to bornunbreakable.com to schedule a free transformational call. Action begins today.
Welcome to the Born Unbreakable podcast. I'm your host, Coach Des, and we are at episode 151. What a journey it's been, and I'm really excited for today's guest and today's topic and where this conversation is going to go. I have Melisa Keenan with me, and she has a title that I really fell in love with because it's kind of provocative, and I just sunk my teeth into what she does and her story, and I was just so compelled by it. I was like, ooh, this is the epitome of Born Unbreakable. So Melisa is an intimacy coach, and I'm going to let her tell her story, but I just want to start with thanking her, because the reason I had such an attraction to her as a guest is because of her vulnerability. You know, before hitting record to do this interview, Melisa and I were talking about how when you come into a self-development space, there is this sensation of being an expert and wanting to be perfect in the way that we portray our knowledge about something. But I think it's in the pain, the struggle that got us to a place to be able to teach and help people that is the most relatable. So I just want to thank her for her vulnerability, and thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, so, I've talked about falling in love with your story. So we have to start with that, because before you got to this place of helping people with intimacy, whether it's in their business or their personal relationships or both, I imagine it's difficult to just separate the two things. You had experience seeing your parents in a certain light, and then also had faced some challenges in your own personal relationship and marriage that has taught you quite a bit. So I'd love for you to start with sharing your personal story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it probably honestly goes back even a little bit further than my parents, because my ancestry on either side is like laden with pain in romantic relationships, adultery, and gosh, one of my grandmothers raised cousins that her husband left her, and she still raised his nieces and nephews, like just crazy stuff, including, incest, and including abuse, and all kinds of everything you could imagine is in my ancestry. And so, so you can imagine growing up, I have been very much like on guard with men, very like I can remember as a kid being super obsessed with wanting like a boyfriend and stuff because of, media and culture. Like I was so into like 90s R&B and stuff. I wanted a boyfriend.
Hi, welcome to my world. Melisa and I were living the same life.
But at the same time, I couldn't even speak to them. Like I couldn't even speak. Yes. And then I did, see painful things and have some painful experiences myself. And so it was scary. And then my parents. So then, you bring me to the point of I'm about 9 years old, and my mom started to get really sick, and she stopped being able to go to work, and eventually she filed for disability, was like completely unable to work. And often I would come home and just find her passed out on the couch. So I stopped wanting to bring friends home and stuff like that because it was embarrassing. And this was my perception of what had happened, right? And so eventually my dad got tired of this and divorced her. This is my perception. Well, the reality, when you're an adult and you look back, actually, my dad also had an affair, and he also had a drug addiction that, according to my mom, was kind of secret to her. She didn't really know. And I remember them fighting a lot about where's all the money. He ran his own refrigeration business, and it was always like, they were always screaming about money. Where's all the money? Like, where has it gone? And I think it's because he was both doing drugs and dealing drugs. There was a lot of crazy stuff happening in my upbringing. And so eventually my parents divorced, and my mom, had no resources to deal with what she was going through, both her health and now her marriage crumbling. And she had, I know she had betrayal trauma, but that term has only come about in the last 10, 15 years, betrayal trauma, which is really PTSD from the betrayal you experienced in your partnership. And so in my experience of her as a child, it was like she went nuts. She was just crazy. You never knew what she was going to do or how she was going to be. She became physically violent, definitely emotionally abusive and stuff. And so we were back and forth in court all the time. I was in court all the time with my parents until I was 12 years old, and my mom had gone too far, and my dad won custody of me in court. And then 2 weeks later, he woke up in the middle of the night, and his stomach was extended out like a foot. Like, he looked pregnant, and we were so scared, and he was in so much pain, and we rushed him to the hospital, and he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Which always makes me cry. I can't talk about my dad without crying. So he had literally just won custody of me, and it was like, we're going to start a new life. He had gone through all kinds of, rehabilitation through the divorce. He went to a Christian rehab center. We got baptized into a church together, all this stuff. And it was like, we're going to start a new life together. And then it was like, no, you're not. Actually, like, his time on this earth is done. It was so devastating. So I moved in with my aunt and uncle, and I tried to live with my mom again. What's that?
On a ranch with your cousins and all the animals.
Yes. Yeah, the story gets really deep, doesn't it? So take heart if you're listening. Take some deep breaths. It's funny.
They just had an episode on stress management, so people learned how to breathe, and now they can apply what they've learned in this.
Very good.
Practice their breathing.
It's funny having lived it, because it took me most of my 20s to realize how intense my upbringing was. When you live it, you're just like, well, this was my life. I lived it, and it's not until you get other people's reactions that you realize, and some maturity, that you're like, oh, wait, like, this was not like a normal upbringing. Yes. So yes, I grew up with my aunt and uncle, and, fast forward then into my own college years. I joined a church. All through high school, I was like, I'm probably going to just be a career woman, and I'm not going to have a family. Like, hello, that makes a lot of sense given my circumstances in my childhood. But I joined a church when I was 18, and a huge tenet in that faith is family. And it just got me really thinking, like, maybe my family was so broken because we just didn't really have like the right tools or something. Like, maybe if we had the safety and security of like this faith and a community and like, living by different commandments and morals and principles that were missing from my upbringing, like maybe I could have a better chance at love and even potentially motherhood. It's funny because when I met my husband, we met in a calculus class in college. And our first date, he told me he wanted 9 children. And I was like literally thinking maybe we would negotiate on like a half a child. Who says that on a first date?
Gosh. Well, talk about putting it all out there.
Putting it all out there. So really I always say that was my only red flag on our first date. I was just thinking we'll have to negotiate that one later. I never would have imagined I would have 4 kids. I have 4 kids right now.
Yes.
So anyway, we crashed into love like with such open hearts. Like I had regained this naivety and hopefulness like a child again. And it felt so good to like let go of all the pretenses and, defenses and stuff. But then once we got married, and I've seen this happen with clients too, once we got married, my whole heart walls, everything just came up and I was terrified. And then add to that, we got pregnant right away. So then I'm like, now we're going to put this little child that's so vulnerable. And now I'm responsible for this child and the like happiness in this marriage. And like, it was so intense. I was like traumatized constantly because I hadn't dealt with any of the stuff that had happened in my childhood. I thought I was over it, air quotes, because there's no such thing. Ever. There's no such thing.
Over it. It's a process.
Yes. So I was just so scared. Just so scared. And that led to depression. I thought I had postpartum. I probably did, but I think it was more complex and just struggled so much. And I wanted to micromanage every single thing my husband did because at the core of it, I didn't know if I could trust him because I had never really met a man that I could trust. My dad had an affair on my mom. His dad had an affair on my grandma. My other grandpa molested his children. Like literally, it was just like, how can I actually look at you and say, you're going to be any different? So 5 years into our marriage, my husband came forward and let me know that he had had a secret addiction his whole life since he was 9 years old. He was addicted to pornography. And it was something I knew absolutely nothing about. In fact, when he first told me, I was so naive and had my head buried in the sand so much to all this stuff that I like didn't really even know like the videos and all the like, I really didn't know. Like I was like, okay, so you look at like some Victoria's Secret magazines or something like.
Oh my gosh, the innocence.
Yes. So over the course of the next 8 months or so, really understanding the scope of what this is.
Yeah.
The depth that he had gone to lie to me, to cover his tracks, like all of the things and what all was involved and where this came from and what does this mean about him? And now is he the devil? Like, oh man, there was so much. And I was diagnosed with PTSD, just like my mom should have been. I at least had resources that my mom didn't have in the thick of the betrayal trauma. And my husband and I ultimately separated for 6 months. We had 3 kids, 3 little babies in diapers, because they were 4, 2, and 2 months old. And it was so intense. I was like, really didn't know if I was going to make it through all of that.
Wow. That is a lot. That is, so much collectively. Well, and to me, like what I envision is this buildup. It's kind of like a volcano because you've got all of this history that you witnessed and felt and observed and lived with your parents, learning also what happened prior to them. in your ancestry, and then you're here in your own personal, loving, intimate relationship, experiencing something that is also feeling foreign to you. It's like stacking, all this stacking. And now you're like, okay, so there's the porn. What do we do with this? And I think it's understandable that taking a break when you're filled with all of this stuff that you're trying to process seems like a natural thing to do.
Yeah.
So you take the break, and 6 months is a long time. Like if anybody is listening right now and you're in a relationship and you have children that are little, being separate from your partner for even 6 hours feels like a long time when you're trying to do this whole partner thing, right?
Yeah.
So 6 months feeling like an eternity. What did you do in that 6 months? And then what brought you to your decision after you got through the 6 months?
We didn't even know for sure like how long it would last. And ultimately, what led to that was he had come to me about a month prior and said, and he was actually at this point, the reason he came forward and told me about his addiction was because he was ready to work on it. So actually, this was all a good sign, but I couldn't rejoice with him. It was like, sorry, no. Like you lied this whole time. So to me, what felt like the most devastating thing was actually him like healing, him like actually seeking support. And so he was doing 12-step addiction recovery programs and things like that. And he had come forward and told me about a month prior, I'm not going to lie to you anymore. Him even saying that, I was still like peeling off my rosy colored glasses and going, oh crap, this means you've lied to me. Like how much if you have to come forward and promise? And like, it just was so like earth shattering for me. And then I caught him in a lie. I caught him in another lie about his addiction. And it was just like, no, like everything in my soul was like, my life will not be like my ancestors. I have done too much. I have worked too hard. And so what was so horrible about this, man, it was so painful. And now my husband and I we talk about this with such tenderness, and I don't share any of the details about my husband's life or anything without his permission. Like we've talked a lot about what we can share. And, he always just says, if it will help people, we can share. It's fine. You can share, which is so sweet. But when that knowing came into me, like I cannot live like this anymore. It was his birthday. And I was like, okay, God, like I'm a big prayer. And I'm like, okay, show me like, what am I supposed to do? Like, can't it just wait until tomorrow? And this answer didn't come from God. It came from in me. And it said, absolutely friggin' not. Like, no, I can't do this anymore. That feeling. And it's like a sacred rage. It's like a thing in you that says, like, I will not tolerate this behavior. I will not tolerate being treated this way. And so I knew I was shaking. We were supposed to be leaving for a dinner date. And instead I was like, can you stop by this park? Because we need to talk. And I was like pale. And I remember my fingers were freezing cold. I had like no circulation in my body. And I told him, you need to move out. And he's like, okay. Like, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And he's like, what do you like? He's like, I can start looking for a place if that's what you really want. And I was like, no, you need to go tonight. And that's how we separated. Oh, so devastating. It's funny how timing happens in the way that it does. Man, sucked so bad. But he did. I was like, no, I mean tonight. And we got back home and I'm like, no, like now. And it was just and I had been bossy, but I hadn't been like that before. So he slept on his dad's couch for those 6 months, actually. Yeah, it was very intense. And I look back now, this was all in 2013, so about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
I look back now and part of me feels like a sadness because that was his darkest hour. Those 6 months were the hardest time of his life. Like, he was fighting tooth and nail to overcome an addiction. And listeners may not realize pornography is an addiction. Like, researchers have compared it to meth, the way that your brain gets hooked to it. But it's kind of like a food addiction in the sense that, like, you can't just get it to go away, or you can't just whack things off, right? Like, it's this whole, like, interwoven, messy thing that you have to, like, peel the layers back to find the truth and the core and be with yourself as a sexual being and, you know, be with your desires and all of that, while eliminating the things that were actually rotting away your soul. Like, it is hard. And
It's like gut wrenching. Just like, you know, the process that people have to go through
yeah,
when they are working through something and fighting for something,
yeah,
right? That's bigger than you. There's you as this vessel on this earth trying to be someone of purpose and value and contribution. And then there is an entity that you're attempting to build. And, you know, there's this preservation. I think, especially when it comes to a family unit, that I think anyone can relate whatever struggles, you know, people might be having in a relationship, because it's real. I haven't heard any relationship that has lasted for several years where there is just no hiccups. Like, that's
exactly.
it doesn't exist, right? There's there's always something that we have to face. And so he's on his dad's couch for 6 months.
Yep.
How did he get off that couch and back?
It's crazy because even when we made the decision for him to move back in, like, I had finally seen his spirit soften and he stopped. Like, addiction behavior typically makes people act in ways that aren't actually characteristic to them, like narcissistic type behaviors. My husband, at his core, is not a narcissist and is incapable of being a narcissist. He feels everything. He is so tender and sweet. But he would act in narcissistic ways. He would blame me for, like, his behaviors, or just, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And I really watched his heart, like, soften and really own his responsibility for his side of the part of our relationship that, you know, he had co-created with me. And I felt like I really made the decision out of haste. It was just like a heat of the moment, like, oh, you're like, I see you again. There you are, you know, like, move back in. And it was another 2.5 years of difficulty before I think either of us really felt like this marriage is going to last. This marriage is going to be the marriage. And because we would try to come back together, and we would, you know, get closer and closer, and then we would crash, like a huge crash, you know, just fighting, and neither of us knew how to communicate. There was so much learning happening during this time that then we'd have to just go back to our own lane and work on ourselves again, go back to our own lane. And this is where, you know, in my darkness, and why I couldn't be there for him, because I literally was still traumatized from my whole entire upbringing. This is where I really had to, like, come to Jesus in myself. Like, really, you know, how did I contribute to the misery in this marriage? And how have I contributed to my own personal misery in general? And this is where I really felt led to understanding principles of the feminine, understanding vulnerability, understanding the core of who I am, which was so not attached to what I could do or accomplish or achieve, which I thought it was before that. So I felt like, I look back on this time now and I'm like, this was the biggest gift because it broke me wide open. And I remember just like kind of going to God while we were separated and just going, I don't have any answers. Like, I thought I had it all figured out. I have no answers. Show me. And it felt like God was like, finally, now I can show you who you really are, which seemed like the strangest answer in the midst of like the biggest storm, the biggest crap show that we could be in, it was like, show me who I am. But we did. And so it was about 2.5 years after he moved back in.
Yeah.
That we finally, I remember the moment so poignantly. I was sitting on my bed and there was nothing interesting happening. He was getting ready for work that day. And I was just watching him and it just hit me like, oh my gosh, we're doing this. And like this connection that we feel, this is different than I even knew existed. I had no idea this was possible. And just in that same moment, it was like, women need to know. That was like my whole soul was
this
like,
is an epiphany. This is an awakening. And here's what I find so interesting. And this is why I'm so attracted to this story, because I want people to know how messy it really is. Like, we have this notion somehow that things happen in this sequential order of perfection, which is total crap, because you're having this epiphany, mind you, 1, 2, 3 children later. You know what I mean? Like, most people are like, oh, you figure all this stuff out and then you go and then you have the kids and all the things, but it doesn't work that way. You were already a mom, you were both parents, you were trying to figure these things out. And so, what was different in your intimacy, giving yourselves this second chance to work at your marriage than before?
I love that question. I think that I felt this quality of connection that I had never experienced with another person. And, it's funny because it actually it took me years after that to break down why. Like, we did so many programs, so many therapists that we saw, and addiction recovery programs. And we were at meetings sometimes like daily. There were different programs and things that we did that sometimes required like so much of us. And it was like, what out of this actually really benefited, Mm-hmm. And certainly now at this point, I'm certified in all kinds of stuff and I've pulled together the different parts and pieces. But if I really strip it all down to its core, I don't talk about this very much because it's not sexy at all. People are like, no, don't tell me that. It was honesty. It was brutal honesty is what made the biggest difference. Like, we sat down, and if I could pinpoint like one pivotal moment where it was like truly a hinge point for us, was we sat down with these things called inventories. And there's a process that in the 12 steps, every 12-step program has some form of inventory where you basically go through and write down every horrible thing you've ever done or thought or anything.
Agonizing. This is agonizing. Yeah.
Yes. And particularly because we knew we were going to share parts of this with each other, it was done with a professional and stuff like that. So that there were parts, it was like, do you not need to share that part? Maybe you don't, like, there was a lot of like preparation work that went into it. But at this point now we know everything. But,
a lot of intimacy happened. That really honest connection. And that, I probably should have taken a step back for us to define that a little bit, right? Because people think intimacy, like, what does that really mean? Is that like romantic intimacy where you're like that body connection when you're thinking about sex? Because a lot of times that's where what we think is intimacy is when you get to that point when you're ready to be sexual with someone. And I think that in learning about what you do, that's certainly an aspect right? Because everybody enjoys that. I think that could be an assumption. But I believe that intimacy is more expansive than that. And it hits on exactly what you just said, which is honesty. When you have that bare, naked emotion that is raw and real, and you're not thinking about how is the person going to respond to this. You're just letting it land and allowing what is to be. And I think so often, and this is what I find very interesting, because now we're in a dating world where you can just go online and it's like Hinge and Bumble and Match and I don't know, all the millions of probably options that you could go to. And when people are dating, it's all about putting your best foot forward, right? In all the categories, you're putting your effort into your looks, you're putting your effort into your showing up as your best self, you're polished, you're put together, but it's always after time, right? Where you see what the real deal is. What are people's habits? How do they behave under stress, under pressure, when things, are falling apart, when there's trauma? That is when you get to see the whole picture. And that's the part that is the work, right? And so it's not just this is so fun. Oh, I'm so attracted to you. We just had so many wonderful dates, because, real life is all the hard stuff,
and I feel like I have shifted my perspective on that a bit, because real to me used to mean all the hard stuff, and deep connection used to mean hard work. But now, again, that whole trauma was 10 years ago. Like, we are well into like a seasoned version of this new foundation that we laid for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to feel like work. It just has to feel real. Now, it feels like work to us because we live in a society that doesn't feel real. People don't show up with all of themselves. That like everything we do is to like cut off our emotions and what is going to put me into high productivity. Like, high productivity is prized above all other things. And it's literally just saying, can we even put that as equal with connection, please? Like, or, if connection just come up on the list a little in priority, right? So it doesn't really have to feel like work. And I don't know if my husband would describe our relationship as work as much as like, because it becomes life-giving. It's like, there's this boon that we can crawl into with each other, where it's like, man, yeah, this is what's up for me. Yeah, this is what's up for me. And then we can like be in joy together about it. We can be in sadness together about it. We can be in vulnerability together about it. And then we come back out and like emerge from our little like cocoon. And now, our kids are all a part of that sweet, like our home just feels like a haven. And then we can crawl out of that and go and like, okay, serve and whatever we need to do. But it's just a willingness to get real. So at first that does feel like work, because like everything from the time that you're 2 and your parents are saying, you're fine, stop crying, you're fine, to now, where it's like you cry in your corporate job and people are going to say you have mental health issues. Like, it's real, right? And so to reconnect with that part of yourself, that can feel like work. But once you've done that, it's such a sweetness, because now it's like me and, and my openness and my husband and his openness, and our marriage is the sweetest part of our life. The connection there, even if it means hard conversations, even if it means that I'm like, why are you doing that? Or vice versa,
Thinking.
Yeah.
We're not on the same page right now.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Now, here's a question for you, because this is one I believe that it could potentially be this ubiquitous struggle, because I don't know that I've met one person that hasn't been challenged by this at one point. And in particular, women. trust. This issue of trust for, and it is this buildup because it's things that you've seen that plants a seed of distrust in you. It's not even your relationships yet. It's just ones that you've observed. And then you go out and seek your own. And then now it's that much closer to you. And if anybody has gone through any sort of betrayal in some type of way, whether it's infidelity or just lies or whatever that looks like, what is that recovery? Because that's usually this crossroad in many relationships where when trust has been broken so bad, many people feel like there's a point of no return. It's like, I can't even fathom another minute with you because you have gone so far beyond breaking me down to this point that I'm unable to continue with you. But like I said, it's a crossroads, so you can do that, or you can go, I'm upset.
Yeah.
But I do want to figure this out. And it is a choice. How do you get to this place of being able to build trust when it has been broken?
Yeah, so huge. And I love that you brought this up because it is so prevalent. I remember lots of women that I had surrounded myself with didn't know what I had been through. And I would go to this workout group, and I remember these women getting together, and they were talking about somebody's sister who had just had adultery in her marriage. Her husband had cheated on her. And, the consensus in the room was very much like, there is no way. I would not tolerate that. I would not stay. And it was eating me alive inside because I think at this point, maybe we were a year into having moved back in together. So there wasn't a whole lot of reason to tell people like, well, actually our marriage may not survive. Like we're building back from this like right now. But I was dying inside listening to them. And ultimately I just said, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. And I just said, you know what? I think that you don't know what you would do until you find yourself in that situation. And then they all kind of were like, I guess you're right. And, but we carry this, and it is because of our ancestry. Like the women haven't been respected no matter what culture you're from, right? Almost across the globe. The women haven't been respected. So literally this is in our DNA, this distrust. So that's the first thing I want to say. And then you add to the fact that like, okay, now I'm in a partnership with someone who literally proved that they're superhuman. And then what am I supposed to do with that? And ultimately the biggest, I think, wound that we really need to heal is that our whole life we've been taught not to trust ourselves. So, again, back to like, why do I have these feelings? Why do I have these desires? I followed this desire, or I thought this was my intuition telling me to go down this route. It led to tons of pain, all those kinds of things. Then we create more and more distrust with ourselves. And so that's what I really had to face in my marriage. I had to face that there was no way I could ever trust him until I learned to trust myself. And I had to begin to build that. And then like being in a relationship with someone who's human became less scary because I don't look to my husband for safety. Like heaven forbid, I'm not out there inviting him to go run around on me or anything like that, or drop balls, or not be a provider, or not be the father to my children, or, whatever. Like, it's not that, but it's like at the end of the day, who's going to make me feel safe is me. And so I had to restore that connection with myself. We have to do that work. And then we can start to approach everything around us from a new space. I mean, I ultimately realized I didn't even really trust the universe. Like I didn't really trust the whole experience of life. I kind of felt like it was out to get me. And I had to shift that too. That one, I'm still in that one. I'm still like, every day, like, oh, whoopsies, there I am again saying like, of course this happened to me, right? How often do we say that one? Like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
And what does that really mean? It means I believe that the universe is out to get me and my life will never be beautiful or easeful or joyful or what I want. It'll always be a struggle. So as long as we carry that, we co-create with that.
You do. And you bring in that. That's why I have an alarm that says the universe supports me, because I have to have that energy and believe it. And it needs to be consistent and it needs to be lived on a daily basis for that to be my reality, right? Because we create the reality that we live in, whether it's distrust or it's belief and faith, in yourself and in other people. But, you're absolutely right. I think putting the energy into ourselves sometimes is that hardest decision to make. I have been reflecting on this notion and did this episode on letting go of our past identities, because there's an attachment and it comes from our upbringing and what we've been taught and what we've been told. And there's somehow, I think, as you get to this place of evolution and maturity, almost like a cleansing experience that you have to do with things that don't serve you, because you're at a point in your life where you're trying to create this capacity to let love in, to let hope in, to let trust in. But when you're full of all this trauma and all these stories, there's no room for anything else to enter in there, right? So it's like, how do you create the capacity to listen, to learn, to love, and to have that safety of honesty, be there. So, I appreciate the candor of you, talking about the arc of your story, because it was this, not this perfect line. It was a little bit more like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So intimacy, when you have someone come to you, whether it's them coming as an individual or a couple, how do you start in your work with people when they're wanting to attract greater intimacy, greater connection, greater honesty, greater vulnerability?
It's really simple. We just start with their desires, which actually, maybe I shouldn't say it's simple. It's simple for me. It's often not very simple for the client. Typically, again, as part of this distrusting ourselves, we learn to distrust our desires because they didn't happen, especially in a partnership. I'll have women come to me who it's like, well, for example, I really wanted that deeper connection with my husband that was beyond sex. Like I wanted emotional connection, spiritual connection, that tenderness. I wanted to get the sense that he really values me as a person. But after being hurt multiple times and seeing that it seems like he's incapable of that or has no desire to do that, then we just let that desire die. Yes, it's
so tragic.
Yeah, it's so sad. And then we do things like take all that energy and pour it into our business or pour it into perfecting something, and typically really frustrating ourselves in the process because it's not actually what we want. The thing we're going after isn't actually what we want. What we wanted was deeper connection in our partnership. So I bring women in and it's like, can we find what is that desire? Where did it die? Tell me about that. Like where can we bring that desire forward again? And then how can we support you to do everything in your power to meet that desire for yourself, to call in that desire, to believe that it's possible, and then maybe even start communication with your husband again about what it is that you want. Because so often it's like, Yeah, but think about how you went about that. You were whining and nagging the whole time. Would you want to connect with you that way? Like, that's the reality. We have to just look at like, oh yeah, none of us were given the skills and tools to know how to be in deeply committed and connected relationships. We just don't have them. We are inadequate in our tools and our resources. We are. So you got to look at that and go, oh, wait a second. Like, maybe there's a better way, and maybe that's actually where we got hung up. Like, maybe he just felt so criticized that he couldn't bring forward the tenderness. That was the case in my marriage. I was micromanaging my husband like crazy, how could he really see me as I was? And why would he ever feel safe enough to actually be vulnerable with me in return? If my husband would share a vulnerability with me and I would tell him ways to fix it. Like, women are just as much fixers as men. We really are.
Yeah.
So it's not too difficult, actually. Once we can get her back into her heart's desire and bring it forward, it's typically not too difficult to bring her back into harmony with that. And men, it's like, if he's a good man and he's stayed in the marriage and he's, a committed father or he's a committed husband or whatever, he's like, oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. Like, they have this resilient spirit.
Yeah. There's glimmers of hope there. No.
Yes.
And, one of the things that I want to mention, because these are terms that are used. I don't know that their essence is necessarily discussed in a way that people really understand it. When you say feminine energy and masculine energy, what does that mean? Like, when we're working on those things, whether you're doing it as an individual or in a relationship, what does progress in those areas look like with those energies?
It matters so much, and I'm really glad you asked, because there's actually a lot of poor teaching around this. When you initially start to really search out what is feminine energy, typically women are out of balance and we have more masculine energy than what feels like it's in alignment for us. And so we start searching out, oh, well, what is feminine energy and how do I incorporate it more? Especially in the dating world, the advice is so toxic. It's like, these are your feminine hobbies and this is how you talk to a man in a feminine way. And some of these things that are like really trying to still shove women into boxes, and it's devastating. And typically most of what is taught there is in the realm of cultural feminine energy or cultural femininity. So it's important to know the distinction between cultural masculine and feminine versus masculine and feminine energy. Those are two different things. The cultural stuff is going to be different based on what your culture is. Like, every culture is different. And so you may have been raised watching your mom be a homemaker and think that that's what it means to be feminine. Even though she was so busy doing all the time, she was probably slightly out of balance in masculine energy. Or you may have been raised, watching your mom primp and get Botox and, some of these things, you may think that's what it means to be feminine. I always say, ask yourself, what does it mean to be a good woman? Air quotes, good woman, because it's kind of a toxic phrase, honestly. But what were you raised to believe, or what did you see and think that it meant to be a good woman? And then you can sort of start to dissect, like, well, okay, now that I am a woman, like, which of these do I actually align with and which ones can I just be done with, Yeah. So that's our cultural feminine side. And again, especially in the dating world, it's like, man, I would be careful. You got to go in there with your discernment on, your intuition like dialed up, because there's some toxic stuff out there. But when we talk about masculine and feminine energy, there's masculine and feminine energy in all human beings. Different variations and different times and seasons call for different aspects of our masculine and feminine energy. But typically, again, women today are more out of balance in masculine energy because we are trying to like fight back from the oppression that has been the case for the last many generations in our ancestry. Mm-hmm. So, but that doesn't serve us in a marriage. It actually really hurts our marriage. Yeah. And so when we talk about masculine and feminine energy, it's the feminine is being more in being rather than doing, which is masculine. It's flow rather than structure. It's a going inward rather than always looking outward. It can look more like spirituality and those kinds of things. It can look like a softness of spirit, like a capacity to be in peace or to be with paradox. These are the kinds of things that are a part of our feminine energy. And especially being able to receive, to rest, to be open, to play, to choose into sensation and pleasure. These are, the characteristics of feminine energy. We're talking about yin and yang, which are principles that have existed forever and don't have anything to do with fingernails or vacuums or whatever, right?
I know there's all this association though, right?
Yeah.
About what that is these visible acts that make it feminine, and then it throws people off if they see a man with a vacuum.
Right.
Like that's what's going on. Is that the feminine energy happening right now? Is that what's going on? But it's more than that, right? It's the things that are spoken, and it's not always just this task. It's an essence, and I love how you described it. It's a way of being and feeling and showing up, and that's, I think, a balance sometimes that we either feel so aligned with or completely out of whack.
Yeah. Yep. And,
right.
And everyone is different. And, you start to talk about the gender spectrum and all of that stuff. What I say to all of that is like, intuitively, what your perfect flow is. And it's different all the time, like different seasons and cycles too, different seasons of our lives. Like, I might be in more feminine energy after a death of a loved one because I'm just in grieving and I'm pulled inward and I'm just all about emotion and stuff. Where when I'm launching a new program in my business, I might dial up my masculine energy more because I'm in leadership and I'm, outward. I'm putting myself out there. I'm in this constant radiation and that sort of thing. So and structure, and needing all of those kinds of things. So it's typically what happens is people learn about this, they get a little bit stuck in their head around it. And it's like, do I have the right balance? I've even met energy healers who will like test you to say like, test your energy to say, oh, your perfect flow is 60% feminine, 40% masculine or whatever. And I'm like, to me, that's irrelevant because it's going to change all the time. Like what is actually in alignment for you. But understanding the principles and in general, in our fast-paced, very masculine energy society, it behooves all of us to tap in and allow some feminine energy. To just tap into what's happening from the neck down is a great practice. Like, what am I sensing? What feelings do I have? What sensations do I have? Is a great place to start.
Yeah. Oh, man. We have work to do. These are the kinds of things that I think it's so amazing that you can work on these things together, right? Like when you're talking about this in relationship, it's a process of two people learning how to create that balance. And I love that you use the word co-create because you're doing it in partnership. And I think, I want to make sure to point out that I know we've been saying couple, but I do think that this shows up in friendships. I think this shows up in business relationships, how you work with people, because you're still establishing a sense of trust, vulnerability, honesty, communication. Those are all valid, even if it's the nature of the relationship is different. Yeah. So those things that you learn are applicable, in both business and in your personal relationships.
Absolutely. Plus our state of being, like we can't say enough about that. Like because business tends to be such a masculine energy environment, it's like we need more feminine energy. We need more business owners who are willing to turn off their phones at different times and just give space and time for what their heart desires, for connection with their family, for getting on the floor and getting all giddy and present with their kids, and being willing to jump on the trampoline or roll in the mud or whatever it is, or just being out in nature, and really taking in and being present with what's around us. We just need more of that kind of presence, and really relationships in general fostered in feminine energy are more successful. Yeah. Relationships only fostered in masculine energy tend to just have distrust imbued deeply within them, because you miss all the nuance, all the emotion, anything that would provide actual connection. This is why a lot of people hate their coworkers. People who love their coworkers, is because connection has been fostered. And typically that's from the top down. The corporation sees and values connection and knows that the team will thrive better when they are connected. So they don't mind when there's extra time spent in the lunchroom, outside of break times and stuff like that, or they actually foster conversations like that. And people in those environments love their coworkers.
Yeah. So. It's true, right? It's the stuff that is unstructured. It's the hallway conversation. It's the water cooler. It's that moment that you actually learned about someone's family life that you had not any clue about, right? It's knowing that not only is that person brilliant at what they do, but they're funny and they have interests and hobbies and, talents that you may not have ever known if you didn't take that extra time with that connection. Melisa, if there was any kind of last thing that you would say to anyone who is hoping to bring more intimacy, or improved intimacy into their relationships, what would you say?
You can't go any deeper with another person than you've been willing to go with yourself. Intimacy can be broken down into 3 words: into me, see. And so we have to be willing to go within us and look for the parts of us that have remained hidden, or maybe that we've even shunned away or let die, and go in with love and compassion and acceptance and understanding and heal up whatever needs healing. And when we do that, we create a beautiful environment to bring someone else in. Like, no one can see me deeper than I can see myself. No one can really hold that space, and I can't see deeper into them than I've been willing to see into myself, with that same love and compassion and understanding. And so my invitation is anything, even mindset work, even some things that call themselves personal development in air quotes, that pulls you away from your connection with yourself or invites you to deny parts of you so that you can be in high productivity. Let those things go and pursue the things that allow you to move into deeper trust and discovery with yourself. And that's the best place you can start.
Oh my gosh, that is so profound. If there was a clip to replay, just rewind about 60 seconds back. The last 1 to 2 minutes is amazing. We talked about the importance of my platform being the recognition of self-limiting beliefs that we've had to overcome. What's a self-limiting belief that you've had to overcome?
Ooh, what a juicy question. Well, we've already talked a lot about people can't be trusted. So I'll say the other one, which is I'm not enough. And people expect too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so heavy.
I've had to work hard on that one. And, initially it was just learning to love myself, like I just said, but actually that only took me so far. In the last 2 years, or about a year and a half, I've made some new strides with that one. Cause man, even once you do the work, then it's like, okay, well, I can see it and I don't have to let it control me, but it still shows up all the friggin' time. Right.
I think you're never done.
Yeah.
There's not, and that's I think the mistake that sometimes people make when they first start working on themselves is thinking like this one course or this one book is going to revolutionize everything. And like, I think it's a step to opening you up, but I think your mind's, it's like going to the gym. If you want to be physically with, your heart being healthy, you don't just go to the gym once and then you're done. It's constant. And I think it's even more vital when it's for your mind and your spirit, right? It's like, it's this holistic experience that you're creating. And it's never going to just be this one-time deal where, you pay $99.99 and like, it's gone. All my problems. Melisa, where can people find you? Where can they follow your work? Where can they find you if they want to learn more and get more from you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a free Facebook group that I run for spiritual high achieving business owners, women. And so if you relate with all of that, come and join us. It's called Women Manifesting Intimacy. And then I also have a free intimacy guide that brings you into my email community as well. And the intimacy guide is great, takes you through some of those, like I said, beginner steps of creating intimacy with yourself. And you can find that at www.melisakeenan.com.
Amazing. Well, I will make sure that is in the show notes so people can click directly there and access that great information and also connect with you if they feel so compelled. Is there anything that you want to share before we part today? I feel so uplifted.
Just thank you. Thank you so much. And I would say too, intimacy, we all want deeper connection and we all put up walls to deter that deeper connection. Any step we can take in that direction is so worth it. And it blesses every aspect of our lives every time. So take the step, even if it's scary.
I know, but it's that gift that is so worth it when you choose yourself. Fancy that. What happens when we choose to invest in ourselves and pour that love that, and it's everything from the acceptance, the forgiveness, the healing, and the love. You have to be able to go through those pieces to appreciate the essence of who you are and who you're becoming. It's a beautiful thing. It is scary, but it's so worth it. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much.
Wow. What an amazing conversation with Melisa Keenan, intimacy expert on a topic I could spend hours discussing. What I love is the raw realness of her story and the recognition that relationships are work. Relationships are work, whether they're brand new or you're 15, 20, 30 years in. And that critical factor that she brought up in terms of intimacy that changes everything, which is maybe no surprise to you, or like she was saying, you don't want to hear, is honesty. Brutal honesty. Ask yourself the question, are you being brutally honest in your relationships? Whether it is your romantic relationship or relationships with your friends, business associates, it is one of those things that truly, as cliche as it sounds, can make or break. make or break a relationship because it's such a foundational element. It's such a building block to success. And I would invite you, as we close this episode on intimacy, to start with what Melisa said, which is yourself. And I love how she said, "Into me I see," right? Get real with yourself in terms of what your desires are. What is it that you truly desire? In all the elements of your life, be brutally honest, starting with yourself. What does that look like in love, in sex, in business, in life? Have you ever done an inventory of your desires? Now, she did it with a professional, with her partner, but I believe we can do that exercise for ourselves without facilitation. And if you want to step it up and take it to the next level, you certainly can do that in a guided way with a professional, for yourself and with a partner, if that is something you so wish and choose to do. I hope that you learned a thing or two out of this conversation with Melisa and I, whether it was just an evaluation of your own intimacy, thinking about that masculine and feminine energy and how you bring that into balance in your life. I just appreciate the learning. What a great conversation. Remember that you are your only limit. So take action today and stay tuned, because there's a lot more awesome episodes coming your way. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.